There was a lot of hard work to get it to a comprehensive transportation package, and legislators at the end of the day could not get that over the finish line.
That was Oregon Governor Tina Kotek there reacting after Oregon lawmakers in their session without passing a major $12 billion transportation bill. That massive spending bill, which was being pushed by Democrats, just did not have the votes at the end of the day. And because it didn't get passed, ODOT is now facing a multi-million-dollar budget shortfall and could start laying off workers this coming week. House Bill 2025 would have included significant increases on both the state gas tax and registration fees in order to pay for major infrastructure projects, maintenance, and public transit. When it was clear that House Bill 2025 didn't have the votes, legislators then proposed a scaled-down version in House Bill 3402. But not even that bill could get a final floor vote after concerns that the money raised via the new taxes would all go to ODOT and not local transportation departments. Now, Kotek says hundreds of ODOT jobs could soon be cut to make up for the lost money.
Next week, because of the nature of not having the resources that we need, we will have to initiate layoff notices at the Oregon Department of Transportation. So while it was a long day yesterday, I'm sitting down with my team today. We're going to huddle. We're going to figure out what we do next. I'm going to continue to work on this, and legislators will be hearing from me.
Now, Kotek partially blamed the failed bills on Republicans' unwillingness to work across party lines. That despite Democrats holding a supermajority in both chambers of the state legislature. Meantime, Republicans are celebrating the transportation bill's failure, calling it one of the largest tax hikes in Oregon state history. In a statement, House Republican leader Christine Drazen said, quote, House Republicans have relentlessly focused on addressing the needs of everyday Oregonians and their families who are overwhelmed by the cost of living and frustrated by never-ending tax hikes. Forcing families to pay one of the largest tax hikes in history when they can barely get by was a cruel policy from the start. ODOT also responding tonight saying, quote, since last summer, ODOT has broadly shared that if the legislature did not address this shortfall during this legislative session, deeper cuts would have to start in the 2025 to 27 biennium. And then adding that because of the failed bill, Oregon's travelers will soon experience a less reliable transportation system. There is a possibility that Governor Kotek could call a special session of the legislature to reconsider this spending package, although at this point, it's not clear if she's planning to do that or not.